My name is Monica Chen. I'm 34 years old, and last Friday night I was nearly turned away from my own hotel by my own family. They didn't know, of course, not yet. They thought I was just the struggling older daughter with a vague job in hospitality, someone they barely talked about in public unless they had to. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to afford a place like that. But I showed up anyway. The evening was meant to celebrate my father's 65th birthday. A private dinner at the Winchester, one of the most exclusive dining rooms in the city, tucked inside the Callahan Hotel. My hotel. My flagship property. The one I spent 4 years and every ounce of energy building into a name that now appeared in travel magazines and Forbes small business features. But to my mother, it was simply a nice restaurant someone recommended. To my younger brother Aaron, it was a little too much, but worth it for Dad. And to me, it was something far more personal. I arrived 10 minutes after the scheduled start, not by accident. I'd planned it down to the minute. The family had been there long enough to settle in, but not long enough to start asking questions about the premium appetizers or the curated wine pairings. As I stepped into the grand marble lobby, the concierge clocked me immediately, subtly tapping his earpiece. The shift in staff posture was instant, but before anyone could reach me, I heard the voice that made my stomach clench. Mom stood near the host desk in her navy sheath dress and Pearl's arms crossed. She turned as I approached, eyebrows raised, voice already tight with judgment. Aaron was beside her, his jaw slightly clenched, the way it always was when he saw me. And just like that, the performance began. Mom stepped toward me, planting herself halfway between me and the restaurant entrance, her smile brittle. Aaron didn't smile at all. "Monica, what are you doing here?" I smiled, calm but firm. "I'm here for Dad's birthday dinner." Her eyes scanned me quickly. Tailored black dress heels, understated jewelry. Clearly not what she expected. "I see," she said slowly. "It's just... this place isn't exactly in your price range, is it? Maybe you didn't know we were dining here." I nodded once. I knew. She gave me that sharp whisper she's always favored when she's about to say something insulting, but wants it to sound maternal. "Just don't make this awkward for everyone, all right?" Aaron finally spoke, his tone neutral but patronizing. "We already covered the cost, Monica. Maybe next time. You didn't have to come out here." I could see the assumptions layered in his expression, that I was crashing, that I couldn't possibly be here for anything other than attention. I looked past him toward the maitre d', who stood frozen, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Then Michael, the head of hotel security, appeared just behind me, impeccably dressed, calm and smiling, with that same quiet professionalism he'd honed from years in intelligence before joining my team. He stepped forward and addressed me directly, just loud enough for my family to hear. "Miss Chen, your guests are ready for you. Would you like me to escort you to the Winchester now?" The silence that followed was exquisite. My mother blinked. Aaron's eyes darted between Michael and me, trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. "Miss Chen, escort her." My mother stammered something about reservations and confusion, but I held up a hand, still calm. "Thank you, Michael. Yes, let's go." As we walked past them, the staff at the lobby began to greet me by name. "Good evening, Miss Chen. Welcome back, Miss Chen." It was subtle, professional, but impossible to miss. I didn't turn back to see their faces. I didn't need to. For years, I'd been the daughter not worth inviting, the one they pitied in polite tones and wrote off behind closed doors. Now, I was the one holding the door open, and they were the ones trying to figure out how they'd missed everything. I was born in Dayton, Ohio, the first child of 2 Chinese immigrants who ran a modest but steady grocery store on the east side of town. My parents worked long hours, rarely took days off, and prided themselves on being practical, disciplined, and above all else, providers. When I was born, there were no balloons, no baby shower stories. Just a note in a family journal and a quick return to the daily routine. 3 years later, my brother Aaron arrived, and everything changed. It wasn't just that he was the baby of the family, though, that certainly played a part. It was how their eyes lit up differently when he cried, how they joked about his future before he could even talk. My mom would tell friends that he'd be a doctor one day. My dad bragged about his strong hands before he turned 6. Me, I was told to help with dishes. As we grew, the differences only deepened. I was the quiet one, the rule follower, the straight-A student who cooked her own lunch and ironed her school uniforms. I kept my head down and did what I thought would make them proud. But Aaron was the one who got praised even when he brought home B's or left his chores half-finished. If I reminded him to clean up, I was called bossy. If he ignored me, it was because he was just a boy. Every time I heard that, it landed like a whispered reminder, you don't matter as much. I remember once in 7th grade, I won first place in a statewide writing contest. My English teacher was thrilled, said it was one of the most mature essays she'd read from someone my age. I brought the certificate home beaming. My father nodded, said good job without looking up from his accounts. My mother asked if I had done the laundry. A week later, Aaron hit 2 home runs in Little League, and they invited 10 families over for a barbecue. It wasn't that I wanted a party. I just wanted to be seen. By high school, I stopped trying to impress them. I still worked hard, but I stopped bringing home awards and expecting applause. I started saving small things for myself, dreams, ideas, tiny moments of joy that didn't depend on anyone else noticing. I joined the yearbook committee and taught myself how to code HTML on the library computers. No one asked about any of it. Sometimes I'd catch my mom on the phone with a cousin or an aunt saying how obedient I was, how grateful she felt that I didn't cause problems, but it always sounded like a footnote, like something to be said quickly before she got to the real point. Aaron's SAT scores, his basketball tryouts, the college scouts already asking about him. There was a kind of emotional invisibility I learned to live with. Not abuse, not cruelty, just a steady, quiet disregard. Like I was useful, but forgettable. Like furniture. The only time my parents looked directly at me was when I said something that didn't fit their script. When I mentioned I wanted to study hotel management, my dad squinted like he hadn't heard right. My mom laughed softly the way people do when a toddler says something ridiculous. Hospitality. What kind of job is that? Do you want to be a maid? I didn't answer. I knew what she meant. She wanted me to choose something they could understand, something that made sense to their community. Law, medicine, accounting. Anything that came with status and certainty, not something that required vision or risk. Aaron decided on pre-med, and suddenly everything fell into place. They toured campuses with him. They hired a college coach. They put a framed photo of him in his lab coat on the mantle before he even applied. When I left for community college 2 towns over, paying tuition with scholarships and working weekends at a hotel front desk, no one drove me to campus. My mom called once a week at first. Always polite, always distant. How are your classes? Are you eating? But the moment I mentioned anything exciting, like the manager letting me shadow a booking negotiation, her tone would shift. Just focus on your studies, Monica. Don't get distracted, as if ambition was a detour, as if dreaming was dangerous. I learned to nod and move on. The hardest part wasn't their disapproval. It was the silence that followed every little success. I didn't need a parade. I just wanted someone to care. But in our family, Aaron's wins were family wins. Mine were mine alone. By the time I transferred to a 4-year university and picked up a 3rd job to stay afloat, I stopped sharing milestones altogether. When I graduated summa cum laude, I sent them a copy of the diploma unsigned. I got a short text back. Congrats. We're proud of you. No phone call, no visit. So I built a habit. I kept everything close to the chest. I worked, I learned, I dreamed out loud, only to myself. And slowly, I created a world where I didn't need their approval. But deep down, a small part of me still wondered what it would have felt like to be seen. To have someone look at me the way they looked at Aaron, like I was worth betting on. Maybe that's why years later, I walked into my own hotel that night, knowing they'd never expect it. Maybe some part of me still wanted them to see. I got my first job at 15 bussing tables at a Chinese buffet 3 blocks from our house. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was barely enough to cover gas for the family's old sedan I shared with Aaron, but it was mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt useful on my own terms. I saved every tip, even the ones in coins, stuffing them into a tin box under my bed. While my classmates talked about homecoming and new iPhones, I was looking up articles on hotel operations and watching YouTube videos on guest experience. Something about the way a hotel functioned fascinated me. The choreography, the logistics, the way it all came together to make a guest feel like they belonged. I didn't just want to work in a hotel. I wanted to build one. When I told my parents I wanted to study hospitality management, the silence was louder than any argument could have been. My dad eventually muttered something about how I should think more realistically. My mom didn't even pretend to hide her disappointment. I expected pushback, but it still hurt to see them look at me like I was wasting my life before it had even started, so I stopped telling them my plans. Instead, I made them happen. I applied to a community college with a hospitality track and picked up a weekend job at a boutique hotel downtown. During the week, I took classes and volunteered to help with banquets and check-ins. I learned to read guests' moods before they spoke, how to pivot from a complaint to a compliment, how to make a stranger feel seen. And I loved it. I was good at it. More than that, I finally felt like I was somewhere I could grow. The hotel manager, a sharp but kind woman named Evelyn, took notice. She gave me extra shifts and let me shadow her during staff meetings. She asked about my long-term plans and didn't laugh when I said I wanted to own a hotel one day. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Then, you better start learning about cash flow." So I did. I took night classes in accounting and read every case study I could find about hotel turnarounds. I studied boutique chains, learned the difference between gross revenue and net profit, and started writing my own ideas for how I'd run a property if I had one. I even drafted fake renovation proposals for rundown motels I passed on my commute. It felt silly sometimes, but I kept going. By the time I transferred to Seattle State's hospitality program, I had already worked nearly every frontline position in a hotel. I wasn't just a student. I was a worker. And that gave me an edge. I juggled 2 part-time jobs and a full course load, sleeping 4 hours a night and drinking way too much diner coffee. My roommates partied on weekends. I ran revenue simulations on Excel. No one was cheering me on. No one called to check in, but I kept moving forward. I started reaching out to alumni on LinkedIn, asking for mentorship and informational interviews. Most didn't respond. A few did. One woman, a former GM turned consultant, read my message and agreed to meet for coffee. That coffee turned into an internship. That internship led to my first taste of strategy work, analyzing guest feedback trends and suggesting operational changes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Every win was earned in silence. But I didn't need applause. I needed progress. And I was finally starting to see it. I still remember the exact smell of the place. Faded carpet, lemon cleaner, and something musty beneath it all. The Belmont Inn sat on a forgotten corner of downtown, once grand, now barely hanging on. The lobby lights flickered when I toured it for the first time, and the front desk bell didn't ring anymore. Most people saw a liability. I saw potential. It took me 6 months to pull together the investors. I pitched relentlessly, cold-called contacts I barely knew, rewrote my proposal 23 times. I maxed out my credit cards on mock-ups and branding mock-ups. Half of them never got used. But one woman, a real estate developer from Portland, saw something in me. She didn't just fund the purchase. She became my partner. And I made her a promise I repeated in my head every day: after I will make this work. Renovation started 3 weeks later. I lived in a tiny studio nearby, eating microwave dinners and doing site visits every night after my other job. I learned how to read plumbing maps and fire codes, how to negotiate with contractors who didn't take me seriously until I pointed out their missed deadlines and clause violations. I had a clipboard and a backbone. Eventually, they started calling me boss, without irony. We reopened 13 months later as the June House, a boutique property with Scandinavian interiors and an art program featuring local designers. We didn't just survive the first year. We broke even by month 9. By month 15, we were in the black. Travel magazines started calling. Guests wrote reviews like love letters. One woman said staying at the June House felt like being seen by a stranger who understood you better than your own family. I saved that one. And through all of it, I never told my parents. Not when the deal closed. Not when we got our first perfect Yelp rating. Not when the Chamber of Commerce invited me to speak at their Women in Business event. I sent them generic holiday cards and polite check-ins. My mom responded with emojis. My dad reminded me to save money. There was a moment the night of our first anniversary party when I stood in the rooftop bar and looked out at the city lights. We'd done it. I'd done it. And no one from my family was there to see it. I didn't cry. I wasn't sad. I was just quiet. A part of me thought maybe I'd hear from them. Maybe someone would ask why I'd gone quiet. But they didn't, and over time, it stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like proof that I was building something on my own, that I didn't need them to validate what I already knew. Still, sometimes when I signed invoices or walked a guest to their suite, I'd wonder how different it might have felt to have my name said with pride around our kitchen table. But wondering didn't change the work. So I kept building. It started with a group text from my mother, written with her usual mix of formality and mild urgency. We're thinking of doing your father's birthday at this place called the Callahan. It looks nice. Thoughts? She even attached a screenshot of the restaurant's website, which featured a photo of the exact dining room I had renovated with my own hands 18 months earlier. I stared at the message for a full minute, then set the phone down and laughed. There was something surreal about it. My family, completely unaware, had chosen to celebrate my father's milestone birthday in the very hotel I owned, the one they believed was far out of my reach. It would have made a great scene in a sitcom, except the punchline was that I wasn't invited to help plan it. My mom followed up by saying it was probably too expensive, but Aaron had volunteered to handle most of the cost, which was, in her words, generous and very mature of him. I offered to contribute. She thanked me and said they didn't want me stretching my budget. Maybe I could just handle the tip something small. I told her I'd see what I could do through my industry contacts. She replied with a thumbs up. That afternoon, I called my general manager. I explained the situation, trying not to let too much amusement seep into my voice. My family will call to book the Winchester. Give them the best rate we offer, quoted at half the price, and I'll cover the rest under a guest account. He laughed so hard he had to mute the phone. We planned everything behind the scenes. The chef crafted a menu based on my father's favorite dishes, including a bourbon-glazed steak he once drove 2 hours to eat on vacation. I made sure we stocked the exact vintage of red he always ordered for special occasions. We arranged valet service, upgraded the linens, even placed a small floral arrangement on the table using his favorite orchids. I coordinated it all under a pseudonym. When my mom called the hotel a few days later to confirm the reservation, she complimented how professional the staff had been. She also asked why the price was lower than she expected. The manager told her it was a seasonal promotion. She was skeptical, but too thrilled with the savings to ask again. The week of the dinner, Aaron called me. It was the first time he'd reached out since Christmas. He said he heard I had helped with the reservation. Then, in the same breath, told me not to worry about bringing anything. He and his girlfriend had coordinated the gift. They didn't want things to feel uneven. His voice trailed off like he was doing me a favor. I said I'd be there. He paused, surprised. Then he reminded me that the restaurant had a dress code. Maybe borrow something nice, he added. I looked at the custom gown hanging in my closet and said I'd manage. They really had no idea. Not about the hotel, not about the dinner, not even about how deeply ridiculous it was that they thought I should be grateful to be included. I wasn't angry, not really. Just tired of the narrative they kept writing for me. The girl who never quite got it together, the sister who needed help. So I decided to let them have their story a little longer. After all, the real one was about to unfold in person. I arrived 3 minutes before the reservation. The sidewalk was damp from a light drizzle, and the Callahan's facade glowed under the evening lights like something out of a magazine spread. I walked in through the main entrance, not the staff side, wearing a navy gown I'd had tailored for my first investor gala. The hostess smiled and started to speak, but before she could greet me, I saw Aaron rounding the corner. He spotted me instantly, eyebrows lifting in a flicker of recognition that quickly hardened into confusion. "Monica, you're just getting here now. We've already been seated." He glanced over his shoulder, then back at me, frowning. His eyes dropped to my shoes, then to the clutch in my hand like he was doing inventory. I nodded calmly and stepped forward. That's when our mother appeared, flanked by a cousin I barely remembered, and the noise of arriving guests. Her expression said everything. "Oh, that dress. You came alone?" I started to respond, but she held up a hand like I was interrupting something. She leaned in, her voice lowered but slicing through the space between us. "Just, please don't make a scene, all right? Your father doesn't need drama tonight." Then, as I moved past her, Aaron stepped in. His voice was low and condescending, almost rehearsed. "Look, it's probably best if you just head inside quietly. Let us settle everything with the bill later. We've got this covered." He smiled like he was handing me a gift. I smiled back, tighter. Behind me, a tall man in a charcoal suit stepped forward. It was Michael, the head of hotel security, expression calm, but unmistakably firm. He stood just enough to my left that it shifted the whole energy of the room. "Pardon me, Miss Chen. I just wanted to confirm that everything is set for your guests. The Winston suite is ready as per your instructions." There was a beat of silence. Aaron blinked. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. I could feel their confusion hanging in the air like static. "Wait, our guests. What do you mean, her instructions?" Michael didn't flinch. He turned toward them, polite but clear. "I apologize if there's been any misunderstanding, but you're currently preventing the owner of this establishment from reaching her party." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the kind that lands in your chest. Aaron looked like he'd been slapped. My mother went pale. Her hand, still clutching her clutch, trembled slightly. I looked at both of them and said nothing. Michael stepped aside, gesturing toward the private elevator. "Miss Chen, whenever you're ready." The staff had started to turn. A few servers paused mid-stride. The concierge at the front desk tried to look away but failed. Then came the wave of recognition. One by one they greeted me. "Welcome, Miss Chen. So glad you're here. Beautiful evening, Miss Chen." I walked slowly, deliberately. No drama, just truth. Behind me, Aaron stood, frozen hands in his pockets. My mother whispered something I didn't catch. I never looked back. The elevator doors opened like a curtain call, and I stepped inside. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel cruel. I felt seen. Finally. The morning after the dinner, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Missed calls, texts, even an email from my father with the subject line, "Can we talk?" I let it all sit for a few hours before responding. Not out of spite. Just because I needed space to think clearly. The performance was over. Now came the real work. My father was the first to meet me. He asked to come by the hotel, and for once he didn't sound like he was trying to control the conversation. We sat in the rooftop lounge, just the two of us, drinking coffee in silence for a few minutes. Then he said something I never expected to hear. "I didn't know, Monica. I truly didn't know. I believed what I wanted to believe because it was easier than asking real questions." He didn't make excuses. He didn't apologize with conditions. He just listened as I explained how it felt to spend years building something important and being dismissed at every turn. When I finished, he looked tired, but his eyes held something I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Respect. My mother was more complicated. She showed up unannounced 2 days later, insisting on seeing me right away. The front desk told her I was in meetings. She didn't like that. But when I finally called her back, I set the terms. We would meet in the conference room, not my suite. We would speak calmly, and if she raised her voice, the meeting would end. She arrived 10 minutes early, perfectly dressed, holding a notebook like she was about to negotiate a contract. She asked questions with clipped politeness, then interrupted the answers. She accused me of hiding things to embarrass her. I told her I protected myself by staying silent because I was tired of being dismissed. That didn't sit well, but she didn't walk out. That in itself was progress. I told her I wasn't interested in rehashing the past unless it was to build something better moving forward. That meant no more assumptions, no more backhanded compliments, and no more pretending like I needed saving. I told her I'd share what I wanted when I wanted and not before. And if she couldn't respect that, then distance would be necessary. She didn't respond right away. She stared at the conference table like she was reading a message in the wood grain. Then she said she'd try. That's all she said. I accepted it. Aaron never reached out. I wasn't surprised. He'd built his comfort on my absence. Seeing me succeed disrupted that. Maybe one day he'd be ready to talk. Maybe not. I wasn't waiting for it either way. That week, I wrote out a set of personal boundaries and gave copies to my assistant and my legal advisor. I didn't want arguments or confusion later. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was protecting what I'd built. It felt less like drawing a line and more like planting a flag. Looking back now, I see it clearly. I wasn't building a hotel to prove anything to anyone. I was building a life that reflected who I really was, not who they assumed I'd always be. And that made all the difference. It took years of silence, of being overlooked, of biting my tongue and doing the work anyway. But the truth is, I never needed their applause. I just needed to trust my own voice. Success didn't come the way I thought it would. It wasn't a moment of glory or a headline in a magazine. It was quiet, steady, and honest. And it gave me something no one could take away: peace. So, if you've ever been underestimated, if someone's ever told you you weren't enough or didn't belong, I want to ask you this. What did you do with that doubt? Did it break you, or did it build something inside you? Because for me, being ignored became the spark, and choosing to live authentically became the real win.